Disclaimer. The views and opinions expressed in the video are those of the individual and do not necessarily reflect the views of the creators, hosts, or publishers of the video. The video should not be taken as conclusive proof of any phenomenon or event. In our previous episode, we discussed Stephen's upcoming press conference, where the primary objective is to present a wealth of detailed information and ensure its accessibility for skeptics to independently verify the provided data. Let's continue our story from there. Therefore, please tell me your story, including the people you saw, in detail. Mark proceeded to tell Stephen about Mr. A and Mr. B, revealing their real names. Mark told Stephen, "I gave you the real names of Mr. A and Mr. B. When you attend the closed-door congressional hearing, you can reveal their names." In fact, Mark had already been protecting his friends. Mark advised Stephen not to reveal their names at the press conference, and only do so in the closed-door congressional hearing. When necessary and with no reporters present, Mark is mentally prepared, and it doesn't matter if Stephen reveals his name publicly. "I already gave you their names, please take good care of them." Stephen said, "Don't worry, everything will be fine." So, the time jumps to May 8, 2001 from 1998. Stephen Greer was in Washington, D.C., at a place called the National Press Club, where he held a press conference. If you don't read the news, if you only read the headlines, you would think that Stephen Greer went to the capital of Washington, D.C. to hold a press conference. Wow, that's amazing. He must have spoken with government officials. Actually, he went to the National Press Club in Washington, D.C., where a venue was provided for him to hold a press conference. In other words, holding a press conference in Washington, D.C. is not the same as holding a congressional hearing. However, the media reported it that way. Earlier, Stephen Greer mentioned that he had invited at least 100 military personnel or former government officials who witnessed UFO sightings to speak at the press conference. They were supposed to come on stage and share their experiences. However, on the day of the conference, only 21 people appeared on stage. Among them were the MC, Stephen Greer, and 19 other individuals. Mark McCandlish is one of them. Mark is the one who shows the blueprints of the UFO he talked about, and he has shared his story. So, at that press conference, there were representatives from various countries, about 25 different ones, representatives from the media who interviewed him. To be honest, from my perspective, Stephen Greer, it seems like he was boasting a lot. But when it comes to actually implementing what you say, it's just a lot of noise. I thought it would be global news, and there would be hundreds of newspapers, and there would be 100 witnesses, writing reports. And there would be members of parliament, congressional hearings. But in the end, you just held a press conference. And after that press conference, the names of Mr. A and Mr. B were revealed. Mr. A, whose name is Brad Sorensen, is Mark's classmate. Also involved in mechanical design, but his drawing skills are not as good. Mr. B, his name is Ken Sellen, is a retired Air Force officer. So, their names were exposed if you watch that documentary. And Mark, he said, at that time, Stephen Greer encouraged him, told him to give these two names, but I asked him to keep it a secret, but somehow, the names leaked. I think there are many things you should know. I know. Who leaked the names of these two individuals, so everyone knows it in their hearts. After the names of these two individuals were leaked, Mark McCandlish stated that he is not worried about himself. He explains that during the peak of the US-Soviet Cold War in 1988, Mark had a prosperous business. But by the late 1990s, when everyone started using computers and software, like AutoCAD for computer-aided design, Mark's business gradually declined. Mark, being an old-school painter, found himself out of demand as more people switched to computer-based drawing and design. By 2001, he was already in a semi-retired state and wasn't concerned about the leak affecting him personally. Mark mentioned that after he revealed a blueprint for a UFO, many of his former employers no longer contacted him. He expected this outcome. On the other hand, Brad Sorensen, who is Mark's junior and still needs to make a living, lost his business as well due to the leak. As for Ken Sellen, a retired Air Force officer who has been diagnosed with a complex and rare form of cancer, he found himself in a difficult situation. Normally, as a retired military personnel, he would have medical insurance. However, the Air Force found an excuse to deny coverage for his specific type of cancer, leaving him responsible for his own medical expenses. So, it seems that Ken Sellen and Ben Sorensen haven't been in contact with Mark since 2001. There has been a falling out between them. Mark himself hasn't been in contact with Stephen Greer since 2001 either. Instead, there are other UFO organizations like Mutual UFO Network that invite Mark to speak. However, Mark doesn't go out anymore. He feels that he was betrayed after being betrayed once before. It's hard to believe. It has caused a rift between Mark and his friends. Brad has no business, and Ken has to pay for medical treatment himself. It seems like they have been trapped in an unjust situation. As a result, Mark has gradually faded away from the UFO community since 2001. In 2001, after Mark conducted a press conference, there was an expectation that it would lead to a congressional hearing and the public disclosure of UFO files in September of that year. However, after the events of 9/11, the focus of the news and mainstream media shifted towards Kuwait, Iraq, and the war on terrorism. Stephen Greer's efforts, including his documentary, were overshadowed by these events. Mark also faced significant backlash and attacks during this time. Furthermore, Mark experienced difficulties with the tax authorities. They started investigating his taxes, suspecting that he had underreported his income. They would add interest if they found that he had paid less tax over the 8 years. This created a challenging situation where Mark had to pay a significant sum of money, including interest. When Mark was working on his documentary, his girlfriend left him. He had to sell his antique cars and even considered selling his house to fulfill his tax obligations. He felt trapped and believed that if he didn't comply with the tax authorities, he would end up in jail.
Good morning. My name is Mark McCandlish, and for the last 21 years, I have worked as a conceptual artist for a variety of defense contractors. I've been involved in conceptual artwork or the production thereof for Rockwell on the X-30 program, and also on the high step program. That's spelled HYSTP, means